Real estate is a very basic business. It's simply supply and demand. Demand is the amount of tenants who need office space, and supply is the amount of buildings that currently exist. In addition to which, to some degree, the amount of buildings coming online in the next 3 to 6 months. The problem is that unlike a lot of businesses, we can't reduce supply in the commercial real estate business, and for that matter in the residential business. When a building exists, it exists, and it's probably going to exist for the next 50 years, and so the only elasticity in price is related to demand. When there's more demand, price goes up. When there's less demand, price goes down. Over time, we can build new buildings, and at peak periods, we build 7 million square feet of space a year, but generally speaking, you can't reduce the supply when the market gets tighter. Boeing can build less jets. Ford can build fewer cars. We can't unbuild buildings that currently exist. So the first thing is the supply side of the economy, and that's the office market inventory. And you can see here a chart that shows you how the amount of office inventory has grown since 1992. Since 1992, the market has grown by an average of 4 million square feet. There is 71 million square feet of space created since 1992. There's currently about 155 million square feet of space in Phoenix. So since 1992, the amount of office space in Phoenix has effectively doubled. There's 154 million square feet of space. Currently in Phoenix, there's about 380,000 square feet of space under construction, and that's effectively an all-time low. You can see that the lowest annual construction we ever had in 1992 was 400,000 square feet, but that was based on a market that was only 80 million square feet. Today the market's twice as big, and we're doing the same amount of construction this year. Part of that is because we've just delivered 2 projects, and part of that is because it makes no sense to build office buildings anymore, and it won't for a number of years. The demand side of the economy, of the economics, is the amount of tenants, and we measure that in vacancy rate. The higher the vacancy rate, the greater the demand. So here's a chart since 1999 of what's happened with vacancy rates, and you can see that we're currently at 21.8% vacant. That's the highest we've been in more than 10 years. It's probably the highest we've ever been, and it's probably going to get worse. And the problem is, it actually is a number that's worse than this. The next slide we're going to talk to you about is a component of the market is sublease space. Sublease space is space that landlords consider to be occupied. They're collecting rent from somebody. But the market knows that there's tenants who want out. And the market knows that when that tenant's lease expires, that tenant's not going to shift to a new location. So it's sort of what we call pent-up vacancy. And the worst part is that it's space that competes with landlords for space, typically at lower prices. So if you're a landlord and you're trying to lease your space at $20 a foot, a sublease space is typically going to go for $18 a foot. And so now the landlord's got to compete not only with the rest of the market, but with his own building. So sublease space is a pretty bad thing. Now you can see that in 2008 and 2009, we had a lot of sublease space on the market. That number is starting to come back down. And we're at about a historical level now of about 1.1 million square feet. The problem is, the reason that it's coming down is not because of absorption, it's because these leases are expiring. Leases that were signed 2 years ago are now running out of steam, and so they're no longer subleases, they're coming back on the market as vacant space. But again, the adjusted occupancy level, or vacancy level I should say, is about 22.5%. Here's what office space really is to guys like me. It's numbers, and it's a warehouse for jobs. For every 4 jobs, white-collar jobs in America, we have to create 1,000 square feet of office space. That's basically the way the numbers work. Some firms require more than 4 employees for every 1,000 square feet, some require less, but that's basically the way it works. So as long as there is unemployment growth, we will have growing vacancy. There's simply no way around it. And this is a chart that shows you what's happening in Phoenix and what's happened nationally with employment. This is not a measure of unemployment. This is a measure of employment growth, or the lack of jobs. So we're losing jobs at the rate of 8% annually right now, and that trend is not getting better, as you can see. Everybody tells us the economy is getting better. What they're really telling you is the economy is getting worse slower. It's not getting better at all. That's my perception, and in my industry of real estate, that's absolutely what's happening. So to give you a perspective, employment versus office space, we have 1 employee for every 200 square feet of office space. That's sort of the trend, at least here in Phoenix. We have a vacancy rate right now of 34.8 million square feet of space. That means that in order to get to 95% occupied, which is a healthy market, a market where rents are going to be rapidly increasing, and we're going to be building new buildings, and a building where guys that own buildings are buying Ferraris and Rolexes, We need to create 133,000 new white-collar jobs. That's a tall task. That's not going to happen in the foreseeable future. And so we're going to have a lot of softness in real estate for a foreseeable future, which is one of the arguments we make with our clients why buying isn't necessarily a great idea, even though prices are so at historic lows. So let's talk a little bit more about supply. In 2010, we've had 2 major deliveries downtown. We've had Cityscape. It's a larger project. It's 550,000 square feet of office space. In addition to that, we have the Freepoint McMoran Tower, which was called Central Park North, and it's 480,000 square feet of space. So what's happened with those buildings is we have 348,000 square feet currently under construction. These 2 buildings have just come online. In the Cityscape building, these 4 law firms, each of which, or 5 law firms, are each over 40,000 square feet have taken space in that building. The problem is they're currently in another building. They haven't moved into these buildings yet. And so we're seeing a double dipping effect on occupancy levels. There's 1.5 million square feet of space that's being counted twice. In the next few months, these tenants are going to move out of these buildings. You know, Freeport McMoran is going to move out of their current building. They're going to move into the new building. And when that happens, the old building is going to have a vacancy. Right now, they don't. So we're going to see this vacancy rate, which for the last 2 quarters has been relatively flat. It's artificially flat. And we believe we're going to see it start to pick back up in terms of vacancy rates. Just kind of a long way of explaining, don't trust the stats. There's more behind the story. Things have not leveled out in terms of vacancy in Phoenix. Here it is from a national perspective. These are the vacancy rates for the 20 largest office markets in the country. Phoenix is at 22%, the worst by a long ways. The really sad part about this is we can't even beat Detroit. Now, we all know the economy of Detroit is as bad as ours is. The economy of Detroit's worse. The difference is Detroit hasn't put 80 million square feet worth of new buildings in the market since 1992. But the fact is we're that bad. We're the worst by a large margin. You're reading about buildings in Seattle and Washington, New Jersey, and Houston going back to the bank because they don't make financial sense anymore. You're reading about that if you read, you know, the kind of reports that I read. And the fact is they've got 2/3 the vacancy level that we have. So Phoenix, I'm telling you, something like 60 or 70% of the buildings which traded, which were purchased by somebody between 2004 and today, will go back to the lender if there's any debt at all. I mean, it's massive. I mean, we're seeing the Viad Tower. We're seeing, you know, John McCain's building at Missouri and Central. We're hearing stories about One Columbus, City Park North. I can name buildings for the next 10 minutes that are either in foreclosure, that are in bankruptcy, that are with a special servicer, or that guys like me know I can't get TIs to get TI dollars to get deals done because the lender isn't investing any more money because it's going back to the bank. So this is bad times, right? This is effectively a real estate depression that we're in.